We shouldn't actually be all that surprised that the GOP has been relatively dovish, especially on the far right MAGA side of the party. The Trump-aligned people on the MAGA side of the party really are looking at a political environment where they were brought into representative government through their allegiance to and their alignment with an emblem, right, of the new Republican Party, which was Donald Trump. We shouldn't be surprised that these people are broadly aligned with Vladimir Putin and the Russian regime and not Ukraine for this exact reason. You'll recall that Donald Trump received substantial support in the 2016 election from one Evgeny Prigozhin. Prigozhin was in charge at the time of the St. Petersburg-based Internet Research Agency. Some of my dissertation work focused on his efforts to disrupt our political and social discourse on social media through a disinformation campaign focused on highly angry and politically embittered and bigoted language. And of course, if you know anything about Evgeny Prigozhin, you'll know he also happens to be in charge of the Wagner Group, which is, as you're probably aware, at least partially aware, responsible for a lot of the war crimes in Ukraine at the moment. So you can see the picture I'm painting here. It's a rather simple story, right? The emblem of the MAGA wing of the party is Trump. There are people, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world, the Bob Goods of the world, who really owe their political careers to Trump, and who in turn owes his political career in many ways to the assistance of people like Evgeny Prigozhin. This leader, Prigozhin, of the Internet Research Agency, who helped push for disinformation in the U.S. election in 2016 and helped push for pro-Brexit stances before that. This is the individual who's currently running the affairs of the Wagner Group in Bakhmut, Ukraine at the moment. So there's inherent ties here, right, between this far right wing of the GOP and the Russian state. Probably just as importantly, there are intellectual and ideological ties between these groups of people, right? We know that Vladimir Putin is a white nationalist. He's broadly a Russian chauvinist conducting a colonial war of power and expansion. So it's not difficult to see that his authoritarianism, some far right-wing people in the GOP would admire. His bigotry towards LGBTQ people is on display. These are things that he almost injects into his speeches, I think, to intentionally reach out to right-wing folks in Hungary, Turkey, the United States, Scandinavia, Britain, other places, right? The discontents of modernism and postmodernism. So we have literal connections between this MAGA fringe and sort of ideological connections as well. I'll describe, because obviously the MAGA fringe is a fringe, and there are two other components to the GOP that should be discussed, and then I'll talk a bit about why all this matters. The second group, sort of relatively to the left of the MAGA fringe, would be what I would call the opportunists. These are your sort of cynical actors who are very much in it for their own power, and they'll do whatever they need to do to seem oppositional to the Biden administration on really any and every front they can find, and this is how they get their bona fides as true red conservatives, right? Think of your Josh Hawleys, your J.D. Vances. This group is sort of the most boring, right? Because they'll kind of flip-flop whichever way the wind blows, and wherever the consensus grows, wherever the weight of the consensus sort of accrues or accumulates in the party, you'll find them settling there. So they're sort of the least interesting of these groups, but they're also duplicitous and morally bankrupt, obviously, and I mean, frankly, they're pretty cringy, right? Ultimately. And the final group are really the traditionalists. And this group, as much as it pains me to say it, this is really your hyper-intelligent, very historically aware, very strategically minded individuals, your McConnells, your Romneys, people who have accrued a massive amount of power. But these are very, very competent people, and these are folks who understand the contingencies, the historical contingencies and complexities of the global order, of the world system, and they understand deeply, right, the power that the United States has accrued in that system as it stands today. So they understand very much why it's important to maintain some element of the status quo in that global order. So these people understand that the global order is contingent. It doesn't, it's very path dependent. It doesn't have to be the way that it is. It is that way because of historical events and American power projection and hard work and luck, right? But they understand that to preserve, American interests, power projection is important, right? And that Eastern Europe is important, and that China is watching the war in Eastern Europe, kind of vis-a-vis its plans for Taiwan. So they understand deeply, right, that if you want to preserve American interests globally and in East Asia, it's naive to think, okay, we'll just pivot to Asia and leave this war alone. That's not how it works for these people. They're much too intelligent for that. And so ultimately, kind of to wrap this up, why does this matter? Why does the GOP matter for the war in Ukraine? Well, the GOP really matters for the war because this is a war of attrition, right? And so to win, you have to attrit. You have to wear down the opponent, whether through their morale, through their materiel. We need, right, the Republicans on board in some way over the long term for that attrition to occur, especially if, as we're seeing, even tonight as we speak, right, there's rumors that China might be sending some number of drones to support the war on the Russian side. This would change everything, right, because the Chinese have a huge production capability, and this would really shift the power dynamics potentially of the conflict and would make American contributions in materiel even more important. But I think that's the core of the point that I want to make. If you are in a position where you want an outcome that is compatible with American national interests, which I think, I'm sitting left of center, and clearly there's people right of center who feel the same way. But if you want an outcome that's compatible with our national interests, you need to be there in this conflict to promote those interests. No one is going to promote those interests for you, right? And I think that's what's interesting about the traditionalists in the Republican Party is it's strange bedfellows, right? People like me who wouldn't agree with Mitch McConnell on really anything, right? They've seen the movie before. They've seen the, hey, let's just stay isolationist in Europe movie before, and they don't want to watch a rerun, right? They know how that ends. Thanks. Looking forward to your comments.